What exactly is it that you're trying to get me to do?
You have to tell gay men to stop having sex.
Sorry, what?
Somebody has to. Why not you?
Well, wouldn't it be better coming from you as a preposterous request?
It only sounds harsh. You wait a few more years, it won't sound so harsh.
We are very pleased to have with us tonight Larry Kramer, who is also the author of The Destiny of Me, Just Say No, and a very fine novel still in print called Faggots. Larry Kramer, welcome to Theater Talk. All right, this was a significant play politically, certainly in its time, still is, I think, today. Can you take us back to the writing of the play?
Well, I started writing it in '83,
Yeah.
and it took probably, I took a year to write and a year to get on. Everybody in the world turned it down. Every agent you can think of, every theater company, every director, you name it, a who's who of directors turned it down. I knew many of them, and I sent it to them all. And I was afraid to give it to Joe Papp because I had heard he was difficult, and I knew I was difficult, and I was afraid we'd have fights. And so he was last on the list, and as fate would have it, that's where it wound up, and it was an exceedingly moving relationship with Joe and his wife.
Now, rather than asking you why people turned it down, I'll ask you to tell us what it's about what you wrote about in 1983.
It was about the first cases of AIDS. It's really a history play now, if anybody. I'm finding that it's being done all over the world, and the further the plague extends itself into the far reaches of the wilderness, the more it is treated as a history play. People want to know, where did this come from? And it gets produced in places I have never heard of, and in places where I don't get royalties from. But that's okay. It was just very hard to get the word out about what was happening to initially just to gay men, and it made me very mad, and I don't like to get mad. So.
Did you write it in just kind of a white heat, a sort of a fury?
I wrote it in several white heats, yes. Yes, I did. And in those days, it was about anger. Today, it's just about tears. I cried my way all the way through rehearsals. I just did. It's so sad what happened and what is still happening and what is still going on, and that this plague is completely ignored. You know, here are these kids going on about 100 cases or 200 cases, and it seemed like mammoth in those days, but it was all happening around us, so my group of friends. So it seemed like 1 million, but that, and everybody's screaming. You go in and say, who are these kids screaming about 100 cases? And then you come out of the end of the play, there's this big poster that says 70 million people have been infected.
Do you remember when AIDS, it wasn't even called AIDS then, when you first were aware that something was going on?
Yeah. There were little isolated incidents. The image always I remember is I had a friend, two friends, Nick Rock and Enno Porsche, and Nick was very short and Enno was exceedingly tall, and they were lovers. And Nick was sick, and Big Enno was carrying little Nick around both Fire Island and the city, literally in his arms, and saying, do you have any idea what's wrong with him? Do you know anything? Because no one knew anything. And have you seen anything like this? Or whatever. The doctors diagnosed him as having cat scratch fever, whatever that was. And both of them died eventually. And then the Times article on whatever it was, July 3rd, 1981, that was the call to arms.
But you had been pushing for that, though, before that Times article came out. Weren't you pushing the newspapers to do? No,
that was the call to arms. And it's because of that article that I went to the Times and tried to get them to write some more, without success.
But I would think, though, you should have tremendous pride about back then when it was so hard to get anybody with power to recognize AIDS or do anything about it, and you were out there insisting.
Thank you. But again, it's a work of, it's an act of art. It's an act of, I don't call myself an artist, but it's not sitting down to, write the Communist Manifesto.
Yes.
And you had that problem with Faggots, too, when it first came out? Before you were Larry Kramer, the activist, people didn't pay attention to the writing. What were they calling you then?
Oh, I don't know. What were they calling me then? I don't know. But they started calling me it very fast after the book came out.
Well,
it's-
in Faggots, you were sort of, it was a romantic play that you were putting some real people and describing that world.
That wasn't it.
No.
It was basically, I was saying everybody was f***ing themselves to death, if I can say that on this channel, and
They didn't want to hear that.
they didn't want to hear it. And it was before we were actually f***ing each other to death, but as a metaphor, we were. And my favorite line in the book, "Having so much sex makes finding love impossible."
Yes, yes.
And this is an odyssey by a man who's desperately looking for love and unable to find it, and that's what he comes up with because everybody was having so much sex. And I became known as being someone wrongly that was, a prude and against sex and blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't that. It was just against promiscuity.
Well, and I found myself wondering, again, while watching The Normal Heart the other day, where you have the doctor make the point that once AIDS hit, that still, the gay men weren't willing to give up sex, and that this was
Still aren't.
And the whole, now that this is spread to the whole world, that people, isn't that the problem? Still, there's just not the consciousness that this is.
Well, it's turned out to be this huge problem, and I don't know that. Anyway, who knows?
I mean, but Ken, you're asking, so if you ask the human beings to give up sex, you're asking them to give up primal.
Well, initially,
Well, not give it
need.
up, be responsible about it.
Well, initially we were saying not give it up, but cool it for a while until we find out what's causing this. And it was 3 or 4 years before we found out what was causing it, which was what it was expected to be, which was a virus. And if condoms had been used from the very beginning, we wouldn't be in the. But it's more than that. There was no responsibility taken on the part of public officials. The big heavy, and no one ever listens to me on this, the biggest heavy in the rapid spread of AIDS was Ed Koch.
Yep.
No question. He gets away with it. He gets away with murder. No one writes about him as being the cause of all this. He would not do a thing. He had a wretched commissioner of health, David Sencer, who also would not do a thing. We couldn't get meetings with him. It was going up and up and up and up. He didn't do anything. This is the biggest city in the world, his city. It was on his watch that this all happened. I'm sorry. The buck stops here.
Well, you address it in The Normal Heart. I mean, you go after
Yes, but
Koch in
everybody
this
says
play.
Larry Kramer has got this vendetta against Ed Koch as if it's a personal thing. This is an historic thing. The fact that the New York Times did a terrible job has been written about academically now. They know they did a terrible job.
They admit to it in some.
And they admit to it.
Yeah.
But Ed Koch is still denying it because there hasn't been an academic book out there saying this is how it was. Do you know that the records, the health department records for these years have been lost? Ha ha ha. Mysteriously lost. So the paper trail has been destroyed.
And of course, we invite him on this program to discuss.
Well,
the Normal Heart.
and there was a Times article last week where he apologized. He should have seen me, he said. Thanks a lot, but no thanks. I got the idea how to write The Normal Heart by going to see, when I was in London, seeing David Hare's Plenty at the National. And I said, oh, he's got real people in there. He's got politicians, he's got statesmen, and they're all saying nasty things about each other. I can do that.
Did you study then that play, Plenty?
No, it just rang a bell. And then I went to suddenly got on a train and I went to Munich, and I didn't know why I had gotten on the train to go to Munich. And when I got to Munich, there was a sign that said Dachau, and I said, oh, that's why I came to Munich. And I went to Dachau, and it said it had opened in 1933. And I said, holy shit, where was everybody between 1933 and 1941 in this country? And it's the same thing as with AIDS. That was my metaphor, really.
Yes.
Somehow.
And that's when you started writing it, or?
I got thrown out of GMHC, which is what the play is about.
Right.
And that was, and I went to London and I started writing there, and then I went to Dachau, and then I went to Cape Cod and did one draft there, and sent it to my agent. It was the great play agent of our time was a woman called Peggy Ramsey, Margaret Ramsey, who was my agent, and she said, "Darling, you've got to play."
You made me sound like I'm the enemy.
I'm beginning to think that you and your straight world are our enemy. I'm furious with you. And with myself, and with every goddamn doctor who ever told me I'm sick and interfered with my loving Amanda. I'm trying to understand why nobody wants to hear that we're dying. Why nobody wants to help. Why my own brother doesn't want to help.
Mama said there'll be days like this. There'll be days like this, my mama said. Mama said there'll be days like this. There'll be days like this, my mama said.
Hi, Andrew here for Theater Talk.
We're at the 2011 Tony Awards nominee reception. Let's go meet some nominees.
Is there a line from the show that describes how you felt when you heard about the nomination?
Wow. I'm sure there is.
Gosh, you guys, I'm freaking out.
I was silent, so it was like a pause.
I think of my daughter's line. I said, "Baby, I just got nominated for a Tony." And she said, "What does that mean?"
Holy Jesus, Maji Walsh! So that was how I was feeling.
There's a lot of shows about addiction and vices on Broadway right now. Do you have a guilty pleasure or a vice yourself?
Yeah, lots. Yeah, well, I was raised Catholic, and Protestant. So I got double guilt, like those chocolate bars.
Beside the fact I sleep with dogs, some people have called us animal hoarders because we do have 22 dogs that live in our house.
I am obsessed with hoarders on A&E, but with all of a sudden there's just weird dead cats that have boxes of kittens that have been forgotten.
I will just get something into my head and just YouTube it and just watch everything I can find on YouTube. It could be any high school production of Guys and Dolls. One night I'll just have to see all of them. So yeah, YouTube remains a constant vice in my life, aside from the booze and the dope.
Yes, coffee. The girls at Starbucks know who I am. They see me coming. And once I went to Dunkin' Donuts across the street, and the next day they're like, "We saw you. We saw you going to Dunkin' Donuts. Don't ever do that again." I was like, "You're right. That was crazy."
Pizza. If I could do something to make me get free pizza for my whole entire life, that would make me happier than a Tony Award.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Alan S. Gordon Foundation, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.